This is an intro. Who needs an intro? I don't need an intro. This is just the
YouTube, what is up? I'm your homeboy Josh, back at you with the final edition of Coil Wars Battles, at least for now. We'll be bringing battles back and the concept of battles back, you know, challenging a large group of people to monthly challenges, but we've got some other things in the works, which I'll tell you about in a little while. I'm super sorry for the lateness of this particular video. I know that you guys have been waiting for the latest edition of Coil Wars going on. I wanted to get this shit back out in April, and due to things that were just a bit beyond our control here, me and my team, we weren't able to push out this latest edition of Coil Wars until very recently. And then, you know, about a week or two ago, I got very busy. But we're here. We're here finally. Here we are. Okay, Coil Wars Battles. The turnout for this battle was just ginormous. It was beyond what any of the other battles have contained in terms of people who submitted builds to the Coil Wars page and the amount of builds that came in, which makes sense. I mean, it's about staggered builds this month. Staggered builds meaning anything that uses the staggering technique. Anything that puts a gap along the strand of a clapton or along the strand of a staple, and then we fuse into those gaps. Those can be staggertons, those can be staggered fused claptons, those can be staggered stapled fused claptons. They can be so many different builds fall into this category, and they've become so super popular. People love making these builds because they're super challenging, and the limitations of them are, it's just, there aren't any. I mean, the possibilities truly are endless with these sorts of builds, and the amount of different wires that you can stack together, and the variations of how you stack them together, and the patterns you can make by fusing into those gaps. I mean, it really just runs the gamut. You can do so many things with these kinds of builds. If you're into making coil art and into coil building, at some point, if you haven't already, you're gonna be staggering some wire. We went with 7 builders to compete in this particular round because there were just so many of them. We didn't want to just take 5, we went and we took 7. 7 builders are going to be competing in this round. Builds for this edition of Coil Wars Battles feature builds from old faces and new faces alike. First up, we have Macy Vapes. Macy Vapes created what he likes to call the wave coil. Personally, I wish he consulted with me. I would have called it the Hokusai. That's just me. It's all right. It's a beautiful build. The wave features 3 strands of corrugated ribbon wire. He's paralleled that up against a strand of staggered core wire, and then he's fused into the gaps and over the corrugated ribbon wire, creating a sort of a wave pattern. Almost like a Japanese fan in a lot of ways, I feel like, too. It's just a beautiful, interesting looking build. Haven't seen anything quite like this one, I have to say. In another one of his builds using this wire, he's paralleled it up against the staggered fused clapton and managed to get some beautiful rainbow colors out of this build. I love how some of the staggered wraps on the staggered clapton are blue and the fuse between them came out orange. That's just fucking cool, man. That's just a really cool looking, honestly. Some beautiful glow shots here as well. Looks like he mounted this one on up in the Pharaoh. Really just an interesting coil. Beautiful colors, beautiful lines on this build. Macy says the flavor on this build is spot on. Beautiful work, man. Love those colors. Never seen anything quite like Macy's wave. But then again, I've never seen anything quite like Big D's filigree coil either. Another, from what I can tell, another original concept that's never been done before. This is what he calls a filigree coil. In a lot of ways, it looks very similar to a binary coil, but instead of having corrugated wire underneath the fuse, he's got this special custom-made filigree wire that he's created. And apparently I spoke to Mr. Rambo, who is on the same build team as Big D Coils, and Big D Coils used a special tool that he created just to make this particular build. So it's a really interesting one, I have to say. And I also love how the filigree wire, I guess we'll call it filigree wire, underneath the fused wire is still pretty high up there, so it's bending the fused wire in odd ways. It looks like it's just snaking around underneath that fused wire. It's just really cool how it's bulging out in certain parts. I really like the look of it. And the glow shot has to be my favorite of the series, because you see this wire, this filigree wire underneath that, like a shadow almost, within the glow shot. It's just such an interesting looking coil, all wrapped up and glowing up right. Very nice, man. The build ohms out at 0.13 ohms. It consists of 16 plies of 3/16 stainless steel ribbon wire. The frames on either end are 28 gauge Kanthal. The stagger and fuse is 36, and the filigree is 32 gauge nichrome. And I love the sentiment at the end, a little shout out to Not Blowing Smoke and the support for advocacy. That's awesome, dude. Gaius Vapes is up. This is the one shot of his build here. Beautiful bronze colors on this build and the shot. It looks like it's a fused kind of clapception build. He's taken several strands of ribbon, fused them together, then he's clapped in that over a core wire, staggered it on either side, and fused them on together with a light gauge of wire. It's an interesting build, 4 wraps. Looks like it's mounted up in something with some clamps. I dig it. Julio Matsuzawa from Sao Paulo, Brazil, created this really interesting looking mass of wire. This really interesting look to it here, Julio. It is a staggered alien, is what it is. For his frames, he's chosen to take a strand of 28 gauge and clapton over them with a micro clapton of 34 gauge and 40 gauge. Inside the frames, he's chosen to go with 2 strands of 30 gauge nichrome fused over in 0.5 nichrome ribbon wire. And then it looks like he's aliened between those staggered wraps with some 36 gauge stainless steel. It all makes for a very interesting looking build mounted on up in the Pharaoh, and created some interesting color shots as well. Nice build, man. Out there. Definitely out there, but a nice build. I like how this ribbon section in the middle really pops up against the clapton frames, and this alien just snaking in between everything going on here just makes for a really interesting look, man. Very cool coil. Very weird, but very cool. Thank you, man. Also making a return to Coil Wars is Too Cruel. You might remember him from the Pharaoh build that almost won last episode on Coil Wars Battles. He has a miniature variation of a staggered fused clapton. He says that he chose to wrap it loosely so he could show all of the cores within the build. He said he spent about 15 hours on this build. Wow. He's a German builder, so all of his wire is in like millimeters. So these braids as the frames, they are 0.1 millimeter braids. He's added a mirror finish polish to the braids as well as the alien within the staggered frames. He says it ohms out at 0.4 ohms, single coiled. From the core out, it is a micro stitched alien with 0.2 millimeter and 2 strands of 0.08 millimeter wire. The core out from there is 5 loops of a micro braid, also with 0.1 millimeter wire. Outward from there, his mid core is 2 strands of 0.3 millimeter, and out from there he has another of 0.25 millimeter. His fuse is all 0.08 millimeter, all Kanthal. It's a lot to look at, man. That is a crazy build. So we got a stitched alien in the middle, then he's framed it and fused it with 0.08 millimeter wire, and then he's got framed, staggered, and fused out from there, and then the braids at the end, and then fused together again. That's a lot of work, man. Beautiful work, beautiful build. Rap God 123 is up next. Rap God 123 has put together a pitchfork variation for us. It's a 42 gauge stagger and fuse on the pitchfork, and inside the ribbon is just a variation of different sorts of wires. And the reason for that is he's created some really interesting color variations on this coil by using these different variations of ribbon wire. He's got it mounted up 4 wraps each dual coil, and it's just gorgeous sitting there. So he's got round wire frames and then different gauges of ribbon wire coming down inward from there. Probably some 4 then 3 then 2 is what I'm thinking just looking at it. And I love how it has that tiered effect, how it kind of just slopes down inward, and then its lowest point is that whole slab of ribbon down the middle. It looks awesome with that staggered 42 raised up above it. He says he's become obsessed with these sorts of mixed ribbon variations. I mean, you can see how in this shot here, it's all streaked in different colors, and it just makes for a really interesting look if you ask me. He says he only uses pure Atomist ribbon wire, and he has it mounted up in the Petrie version 2. And then he closed out his series with this beautiful macro shot here. You can really get a feel for the individual planks of ribbon in that shot. It's beautiful, man. Beautiful work. Manustone 646 chose to mount his build up in his black goon. It is 4 wraps of this gorgeous snake spine build, and it is a snake spine over ribbon wire actually, and it is absolutely beautiful. Look at that macro shot. You can get a feel for exactly what is going on in there. It looks like it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 strands of ribbon wire in the middle. Then he's got a single strand on either side of that. And then he's fused into the gaps of that snake spine. And he's chosen to curl all of the snake skin in the same direction. It looks vicious. Beautiful color shots on this one as well, and especially on this macro. I love the way this wire colored up, how the curved ends of that snake spine coil have all this blue on them, and then a bit of purple coming out from there, and then just this bronzed awesomeness all throughout the middle. And the Kanthal ribbon really allows those colors to pop. And that wick just looks so fluffy in that goon deck. It's beautiful, man. Beautiful build. And that's it from our competitors this round. Judges this time around included 2 of our previous Coil Wars competitors from Season 1. We had Crazy Vapes and Skitsapart. Crazy Vapes, Skitsapart, Crazy, Schizo. Get it? It's funny? All right, great. Moving on. And we also asked Justin, master of the multi-core staggered fuse clapton, to come on back and judge with us again. So thank you guys for taking the time out of your day to judge the competition with us. You guys are awesome. They've rendered their verdict, and the winner this time around for Coil Wars Battles is none other than Rap God. Rap God, congratulations, you're the winner of this last edition of Coil Wars Battles. You rock, man. Now, as I said, this is the final edition of Coil Wars Battles, but the battle is just beginning. War is upon us again. Whatever you want to call it, it's about to get crazy. Shit's gonna get real, people. Yes, Civil Wars is just starting up. In fact, it's already underway. For those of you that aren't already aware, we have established a very vibrant community over on the Coil Wars group page. The Coil Wars group page is now more than 2,500 members strong. 2,500 people in a short amount of time have made their way over to the Coil Wars group page, and they've turned this into possibly the most vibrant coil building community on Facebook. I invite you all, once again, those of you who are interested in coil building or just have an appreciation for the art that is coil building, come on by, join the page, get in on the fun. I have to tell you, it is the most helpful resource for coil builders out there, for people that want to get into coil building, for people that want to get into photography that goes along with coil building. So many helpful people on the Coil Wars group page helping each other out. And that is the mission statement of the Coil Wars group page. It's centered around everyone lending a helping hand, giving each other feedback, and learning from one another, growing from one another, inspiring one another. The first thing that you see when you join the Coil Wars page is the welcome message, and it basically spells out our mission statement and what you can expect on this page right off the rip. The admins behind the Coil Wars page include myself, Mr. Rambo, that's Dwayne Rambo, co-creator of Coil Wars, include Richie Oliver, also known as ProB300 on Instagram, also known as Mr. Alien, and includes Jeffrey Panzer of Coil Society. 4 of us have been working together, the 3 of them more than me, honestly. I try to get in there every now and again, but I'm so super busy. So anytime that I have to spare, I mean, I hardly get into the group, but every time I stop by the group, I'm amazed at the thriving community that we're building together. It's just wonderful an experience every time I'm there. I wish I had more time that I could sit down and just hang out there all day. I really, really do. But I want to be there more often, so I'm going to be back in the group again at least once or twice a week. At least once or twice a week, I will be making an appearance in the group. going through comments, replying to people, helping people out, and posting some pictures. So that's going to be my commitment, to get in there at least once or twice a week, because I'm just in love with what is going on in that group. It's fantastic. Fantastic. And part of the fun that we've been having together over in the Coil Wars group has been to put together a tournament. Yes, Civil Wars is a tournament style competition. We're going to take 16 competitors, and we're going to bracket them out. So the competition is going to unfold over the course of 4 weeks, 4 episodes. Yes, we're going to be covering it on this channel as well. 4 episodes, 4 weeks, starting with 16 builders and working our way down to the final battle in one-on-one head-to-head competitions. The winners of each round are going to move forward to the next bracket. So we're going to start with 16 to 8 to 4 to 2 people, one-on-one battles until a winner is chosen. And the best part is that the competition is already underway. It's already begun. The competitors already have their builds, they're already working on them, and the first episode of Civil Wars is going to debut next week. How cool is that? Yes, we're already underway with Civil Wars. Cannot wait to see how this competition is going to unfold. But enough of that for now. We'll talk about that more next week when Civil Wars debuts. Then we'll meet our 16 competitors and we'll meet our 3 judges. The 3 judges who have committed to being the only judges for the entirety of the Civil Wars competition, committed to 4 weeks of rendering verdicts. So it's going to be very exciting to see how these 16 builders can impress these judges. So this week, considering I didn't have another challenge to announce for next week, since we're doing Civil Wars and we've got a whole different format, I thought this week I'd go ahead and throw together another staggered build. So what I decided to throw together was a Staple Staggered Staple. The Staple Staggered Staple is just like a staggered staple fused clapton in a lot of ways, except for instead of using round wire for the frames, we're using a staple coil for the frames. So the first thing we want to do here is make our frames, and for some reason I decided that I wanted my frames to be just a little bit wider than my core. My frames, I decided to do 6 plies of 0.4 ribbon wire. And today I thought I'd do something just a little bit different and stack my ribbon off of the fishing swivel. Mr. Rambo shot me a tip and said that I might have a bit of an easier time stacking ribbon if I didn't do it when it was on the fishing swivels, if I did it just off the fishing swivels, kind of freehand. And I think that that method works very well for this particular build for sure. I took a strand of ribbon about 10 times off the spool. I folded that in half, found the middle, then folded it in half again, making 4 strands of ribbon wire. And then I took another strand of ribbon wire about 5 times off the spool, basically just half of what I'd originally taken, and then folded that over those other 4 plies, making 6 plies of ribbon in total. And that, I found the middle, folded it in half, and then holding in my fingers, I wrapped a bit of 40 gauge around the end of it, just to secure everything together. Pulled it all on tight, used a bit of saliva to get everything nice and tight together. You can use water if you're concerned about being a bit more sanitary, or if you're going to be giving these coils to someone else. Me, I'm just building for myself, so I don't have a problem with it. I got all those ribbon wire planks nice and tight together, and I would roll my fingers across it, and I'd always hold my finger at the end when I was bringing my other hand back through the wires again, just combing my fingers through it and keeping my hand at the end to keep it all tight. And not only did it keep it tight, if there was a ribbon wire plank that was out of alignment, I'd feel it move. And that helped me get all the wires into alignment nice and tight together. Then I wrapped a bit more 40 gauge around the end and mounted it up in the chuck of my drill. Now for the stagger and fuse, I decided to go with 38 gauge wire. I just put the 38 gauge through the gavotte and hung it off the drill while I tied it all up nice and tight. And that bit of wire suspending the gavotte became my spacer wire. And from there, from one end of the drill to the fishing swivels, 5,000 RPMs, and I had a staggered strand of staple wire. I decided that for this build I wanted the frames to be just a little bit wider than the core. I thought it would give it a cool look. So I took another strand of ribbon wire 10 times off the spool, folded it in half, folded it in half again. I had my 4 plies, the folded up loop between my fingers, trapped a bit of 40 gauge between my other 3 fingers. Helps to keep it from wandering while I'm wrapping it up. And then I wrapped up the loop, making it nice and tight. And then ready to go back on the fishing swivels again once I had everything else prepped. And from there I had my core. Now, our frames are staples, so I didn't really want to fold them over the core in the same way that I would, say, round wire. So what I decided to do there instead was to cut it in half. Now, I'm not big on measuring shit. I don't like measuring stuff. I don't keep a ruler handy. So what I do have is my table, and my table has planks of wood in there. So what I do is I position my wire across the table perpendicular to the planks of wood, and then I use the planks of wood to get an idea of where the middle is and cut it just like that. Helps me, and it's efficient for me. I can just kind of eyeball it and then clip it. So I position my core between my two frames, making sure that I could maximize the amount of good wire. And I used the planks of ribbon wire that were sticking out of the staggered staple to make sure everything was oriented the right way, making sure all the ribbon was lined up vertically. Holding them between my fingers, trapping a bit of 40 gauge between my other three fingers, I wrapped a bit of 40 gauge around the ends of those cores as well. The cores and the frames, marrying them together and preparing them for the hot glue. Using a hot glue gun keeps everything nice and tight together. It prevents anything from coming undone and makes sure that your hard work in the prep really pays off. I brought the ends together and wrapped a bit more 40 gauge around the ends, mounted it on in the chuck of the drill, and I was ready to fuse these wires together. Stagger fuse. Now, my drill, I love my drill so very much. My drill has the capability of going 5,000 RPMs. It also has the ability of just slowing to a complete crawl. And all it takes is this little adjustment dial right here. Love this adjustment dial. At the third or fourth setting is kind of the perfect sweet spot for staggering wires like this together. To keep the frames and the core in alignment while I was fusing on down the strand, I decided to use a key ring to keep everything together. I always was nervous about using a key ring. I always thought that it would hold the wire too tight and could warp the wire. In my experience, it's been better than using a hair clip, better than using a paper clip. It just held the wire perfectly and balanced it perfectly. And it hasn't warped the ribbon in the slightest. I've been really impressed with using this keyring for it. I forget who turned me on to that technique, but it was someone in the comments a long time ago said that I should try using a keyring. It does the trick, man. Fusing the wires together, I decided to go for a split stagger and fuse every other staggered wrap together. Rather than just fusing the whole thing together, just every other staggered wrap, which can be a bit more challenging. It goes really smoothly at first. It's really fast getting them all in alignment. You just basically watch the shadow and just wait for it to come together. Make sure that there aren't any unusual gaps in the shadow. It moves very swiftly at first. Everything just comes together very nicely. Holding the fuse wire at just a little bit of an angle allows those wires to just kind of come together on their own. And that works great for about an inch. After the first inch, it kind of slows down a little bit. It's like no matter how perfectly staggered the wires are together, after the first inch or so, it becomes a bit more of a slower process. It's more of a herky-jerky kind of thing to match up the angles so that you can land that wire in between those staggered wraps each time. And by the time I get to the middle, it becomes even more difficult. At the middle of the wire, very middle, it becomes, I'm actively bringing the fuse wire all the way over to this way, and then all the way back this way, all the way over this way, and then all the way over back this way, getting them to stagger in the right placement like that. And then as I move away from the middle, it becomes more like how it was after that first inch, a little bit herky-jerky, getting it to go into the right placement, but it's not too bad. At times, I'm even able to hold down on the drill, not go super fast, but fast enough that I'm able to not let off the drill and just go back and forth like this, getting the wire into the right place. I'm sure as I do this more and more, I'll get better and better at it, but then the last inch is just fast again. Super easy to put together. Just kind of weird how it ends up like that in the middle. But I was able to get through the strand without missing any of the alternate staggered wraps. So I was excited about that. Wrapping it up. Wrapping it up is always a nerve-wracking experience with a staple. With this one, I chose to use the tried and true art of vaping squid dudes method, mounted it on up in the vise, and folded it over a 3.5mm bit. From there, I mounted everything on up in the Eco RDA, which is sent on over by Heaven Gifts.
shit, and that is my style.
It ohms out at 0.15 ohms dualed up in the Eco RDA. I vape it out about 130 watts. All Canthol ribbon and stainless steel on the fuse, 38 gauge. In the end, I was pretty happy with how the wire itself came out. I got some great shots off of it. I was really happy with a lot of the color shots particularly. But the whole process of building it definitely reaffirmed for me my hatred of velocity style decks. This deck, looking at it, I knew how I wanted to build it, and I knew that I was going to regret doing it afterward, but I did it anyway. That side impacting screw definitely did a number on a couple of those leads. I wasn't super thrilled about that, but I knew better and I did it anyway. It's all right. I'm happy with how the build itself turned out overall. It vapes pretty well. It's very flavorful, it's very cloudy. It does have a bit of a ramp up with the 6 wraps. I kind of wish that I'd left it at 5 wraps. I think I would have been happier. And if I'd done that, I wouldn't have had to use that side screw. I just felt like 6 wraps for some reason. Whatever. Actually not using any of the bottom airflow right now. I actually just really like it with just the side airflow because it's pointed right at the coil and I have it closed down about halfway. It's really tasty that way, really tasty. On the Coil Wars Facebook group, there's this one comment about how building, there are these days when everything comes together, and there are those days that more often than not, you're trying for a much more difficult build than you think you're capable of. You're trying to sort of expand, your horizons in building, and you keep just hitting a wall every time. And I can absolutely relate to that here, because that's what happens for me. I feel like every other time I sit down to build, I push myself to do something a bit more difficult, and I just run face first into the wall every time, and I just can't get past that build, and I get hung up on it. This time around, I tried not once, not twice, not 3 times, but 4 times to get this one particular build that I just really wanted to make, and I just couldn't bring it together. And every time, the same thing would happen. And I made Staggertons before, but I wanted to make something a little bit more complicated. So from the center out, I wanted to go for a corrugated, a staggered, 4 strands of ribbon wire, and then 4 more strands of ribbon wire with nothing on them, just a regular staple. I was able to build it just about every time. The first one was kind of just like a practice run. I made it with 40 gauge, and I really wasn't trying to stagger it right. And the first one, I kind of was doing something a little different. I was just staggering across the whole thing the first time, and I really wasn't trying to stagger it right. I was just kind of, I was futzing around, really. I didn't work too hard to get the stagger right, and I should have worked harder. I probably would have come together a lot nicer. The second one came together just about perfectly. The wire, everything looked great when it was all done. And then wrapping it, on the wrap, the wire at the end just collapsed. I mean, it looks perfect when you first look at the build, but if you look at the ends, you can see instead of having 4 strands of wire, there are 3. Well, that's because the wires kind of rolled on themselves, and I ended up with 3 strands of ribbon and 1 ribbon wire plank underneath everything. Pissed me off, man. And then the same thing happened the third time I tried, going for sort of a single coil. The wire rolled there too. A couple of the wraps looked fine, but after that, it just all went to shit. And then the fourth time, it all just went to hell with the ribbon wire at the end. It's always the ribbon wire at the end that's fucking me up. So I washed my hands of that after 4 tries and went over to this build, the Staple Staggered Staple. What I realized was that this build, I wasn't able to get it quite right. I got really close each time, but one thing about it is that it taught me how to split staggered. So that, at least, something good came out of it. So I guess the moral of the story, the thing I'm getting at is that even if you push yourself toward a build that's a little bit out of your range, A, you might just pull it off, or just almost pull it off, and B, you're probably gonna learn another skill along the way, or you're gonna learn something that's going to make your future builds come out all that much more better. So I guess what I'm trying to say is challenge yourself. Even if you're not going to succeed at the build, you're gonna get something out of it. Anyway, guys, that is a wrap on the last edition of Coil Wars Battles. We'll see you guys again real soon for Civil Wars. Till then, I'm your homeboy Josh. Vape on, vapors.